A quick bushing change on my control arms on my 2006 Audi A3, and the right one took about 15 minutes to do the whole thing, piece of cake. This one's a whole different story. The geniuses at the engineering department at Audi decided to put the long bolt that holds this front bushing in a couple inches from the transmission pan. So as you can see, there's definitely no way that's coming out of there without moving a lot of other stuff. So there's I didn't find anything online with the A3, so I thought I'd throw together a quick video to give the next poor schmo who's trying to do this an idea of what to do. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff already out. I'm doing a strut while I'm in the area, so I have the lower control arm disconnected and the knuckle out and out of the way, so I have better access. And that's important because this is one of the bolts that's going to come out. This one, and it's an 18, and there's this whole section here. There's a lot of bolts. Don't ask me why, but there's two 18s. This rear one's a funny bolt, a lot of shoulders on it, you'll see when you pull it. Two 16s here and two 10s here. If they all come out, that should loosen up the mount that the that holds the front bushing in place, as well as the entire the rest of the control arm. This bolt and the 6 others I showed you removed, we now have a little freedom of movement there. You can see the whole assembly is loose. It doesn't really get me exactly what I need because it's still connected to the steering rack, so that's not coming out. But I think I can probably wedge things around to get the nose of the thing pointed down enough that that bolt will clear the pan. So let me give it a shot. The floor jack under the back of the control arm, it starts going in the right direction, starts tipping it, but basically the rear compliance bushing runs into its mounting points and stops the progress way before I get the angle I need. So I'm thinking maybe the easy way to do it would be to rotate this, which is really shouldn't be that bad of a deal to rotate, particularly if the bushing's really worn out, which is usually why you replace them. If I can rotate it, it should give me room to move it up in that direction and hopefully fit in this gap and give me more vertical height, which will tip the whole assembly, and hopefully let me get to that. Good idea of just how much the assembly that holds the control arm in place has moved, and you can see now that it's gonna miss. So let's get it out of there. Twisting and turning, I've got it out, and if you can see, it's turned so that it's really likely to miss the pan altogether. I can get I got a extension socket with a breaker bar on it and broke that bolt loose, so should be all downhill. I got enough twist on it, hopefully without doing any damage to anything else in there. So now let's see if the bolt comes out. Good idea of just how much the assembly that holds the control arm in place has moved, and you can see now that it's gonna miss. So let's get it out of there. I can't tell you all how good that felt. Now the control arm should just essentially drop out, which would be easier if I didn't have this jack in the way and I had two hands, so I'm going to get it out. Bonus here, normally if the bushing was as shot as it was on the other side, it would have just slid off the back of the control arm because it's only lightly held on because it's not going to go anywhere. In this case, I'm going to have to actually pull it, and I'm just going to use a standard pull. And yep, it did. And you can see it wasn't that far from gone, but it's still holding on there, so I'm going to have to cut the last little bit off. A little spritz from some penetrating lube in between the hex metal part there and the rubber, and a little love tap with a stout pry bar and my trusty hammer, and it came right off. It fought me all the way, but it was still in need of replacement, sadly. The other bushing right there, and now of course you can do this with just a long bolt and a washer and a socket for the back side, and just pull it right through, and it's really a good process. But if you got a press, you'd be a fool not to use it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and press it out. Should be a relatively simple process. And there it goes. And that's the sound of a completed job. Application of grease around the side I'm going to be pressing it in on, and the inside and the top of the where the bushing lives in the control arm, and I'm ready to press. And should go right in with a little application of brute force. This particular bushing is designed to be easily pressed in, and you can see it's going in just a little bit crooked, but it's straightening out now. It should be fine, and when I get it through the other side, it'll be done, with the possible exception of needing to recover the threads that will be curled under because they haven't fully come out of the housing yet. Okay, now it's just a matter of just working the seal out of the housing where it's captured, because it just doesn't want to come all the way through with the press. If you pressed it far enough that it did come all the way through, you would have pressed it too far. So it's a little fiddly. This is boring, so I'll stop and do it with two hands. And there it is, fully pressed in, ready to install, except we still have a naked hex on this end. I'm just going to clean up this end, and then just put a little grease on the hex so that the new bushing will slide over it easily. Add some grease on the inside of the bushing itself, because you just can't have too much grease when you're trying to force something on. Carefully about which way this goes on, so you don't put it on upside down or backwards or something. And it should pretty much just slide on. Fighting me a little bit, so any job worth doing is worth doing with a rubber mallet. So there it is, one each rebuilt control arm, ready to go back in my 2006 Audi A3. Just a little fiddling, and the bolt is in. Little tip: don't drive it in all the way. Don't tighten it down until you have the control arm sitting more or less at road height, because it kind of takes a set, and that's kind of its center line. So you want to actually put a jack under this this wheel when it's assembled, under this the brake rotor, and bring it up to road height, and then tighten that 18mm bolt down. Now I just have to rotate this whole thing back together to get all the bolt holes to line up and put all the bolts in. There's 6 underneath there. There's the one up here in the front, right there. There's the 3 that hold on the rear compliance bushing, and then I should be done with that part. Bolts are tightened. I would recommend starting them all before you start tightening any of them, just so that they'll all go in straight. FYI, the 2 13mm bolts on the inside, or excuse me, on the outside of that assembly there, closest to the outside of the wheel, actually hold on the sway bar bushing, and the mount for that is likely to have moved whenever you're doing all that, so you'll have to push it back into place to get the bolts to start. Other than that, now I just have to put in the 3 bolts that hold on the rear compliance bushing, and I'm done with this phase. So I just lifted the left hub into the approximate drive height, and then tightened down the 18mm on the front of the control arm to set that bushing, using a straight wrench with a little added leverage, using that one, the old 2-wrench trick. So it's pretty much ready to bolt together, with the exception of tightening up the axle bolt, and that's kind of a trick on an Audi, and I'm going to show you how I do it to prevent having to have 2 people or special equipment. Okay, so Audi says that you can't just tighten down the you can't put weight on the bearing and then tighten the bolt, or you'll damage the bearing. So they say what you're supposed to do is put it in this configuration and have the helper stand on the brake and tighten it to 127 or 147 foot-pounds, 200 newton meters, and then put the wheel on, put it on the ground, and then turn it 180 degrees extra. Okay, I don't have a helper, so what I'm going to do is I put in 1 lug bolt, and then I put my handy dandy hammer, which is, any guy knows, is pretty much capable of fixing anything. And now it will not rotate whenever I put the prerequisite 147 foot-pounds on the hex bolt to do the initial tightening. It's going to work one-handed, but here we go, tightening to 147, which is just off the scale on my handy-dandy trusty Craftsman beam type torque wrench. Okay, so we're good enough to put the wheel on it and drop it on the ground and then do the final Okay, so Audi says that you can't just tighten down the, you can't put weight on the bearing and then tighten the bolt, or you'll damage the bearing. So they say what you're supposed to do is put it in this configuration and have the helper stand on the brake and tighten it to 127 or 147 foot-pounds, 200 newton meters. And then put the wheel on, put it on the ground, and then turn it 180 degrees extra. Okay, I don't have a helper, so what I'm going to do is I put in one lug bolt, and then I put my handy dandy hammer, which is, any guy knows, is pretty much capable of fixing anything. And now it will not rotate whenever I put the prerequisite 147 foot-pounds on the hex bolt to do the initial tightening.